I'm Avram Friedman, and reporting for the Canary Coalition's Real News Project. We're here today in the office of the Dogwood Alliance, and I'm with Adam Macon with the Dogwood Alliance. Adam, tell me something about the what you've been doing lately. What project you've been working on?
Well, Dogwood Alliance is a nonprofit based here in Asheville, North Carolina. Mm-hmm. We've been around for about 20 years working to protect our beautiful and amazing southern forests. And right now we have an emerging threat, the biggest kind of emerging threat to our forest, which takes the form of biomass as a form of energy. And what's essentially happening right now is because of renewable energy policies in Europe, we've seen a rapid expansion of biomass wood energy taking the form of wood pellet manufacturing here in the South. So broken down very quickly, what's happening is that southern forests are being clear cut. Specifically precious ecosystems like bottomland hardwoods and wetland forests. Those are being clear cut, taken to manufacturing facilities, processed, turned into wood pellets, then sent to a port facility, put on big ships, sent across the pond to Europe, and then burned in power stations. And somewhere along that line, the kind of green stamp gets put on it. And obviously this is creating huge problems for our forests and communities and the climate.
This is a huge issue. I mean, it goes to the root of the question of how do you define renewable energy resource? And it's something that my organization, the Canary Coalition, has been dealing with for a long time as well. Yeah. You might be aware of Senate Bill 3 that passed in North Carolina in 2007.
Right.
Called the renewable, which included the renewable portfolio standard that mandated that energy companies or electrical producers include 12.5%, I think it was, of their energy production had to come from renewable resources. But then it goes on to define renewable resources, and as it usually when you and I would talk about renewable resources, we're talking about solar energy, wind energy, maybe ocean waves and tides, maybe some kinds of micro hydro energy.
Right.
But included in North Carolina's renewable portfolio standard is burning wood.
Yeah.
And is also burning methane derived from hog waste ponds, and burning chicken carcasses from huge industrial chicken factories.
Yeah.
And it came to light, after 2007 when this bill passed, that they weren't just talking about wood scraps. This actually went to court, and Duke Energy sued or was sued because they were talking about cutting down trees.
Whole trees.
And Duke Energy won in court, essentially giving them the green light to cut down our forests to burn as fuel.
Yeah.
So, this is a terrible case of greenwashing, essentially. How do we define renewable resource?
Well, that's a great question, and I think that one point to this is that the utilities and a lot of these major energy companies they really like to burn stuff. Right. They really like to burn things, and burning things creates a lot of problem. Now, with our specifically focused on biomass derived from wood-based products, we recognize that there are certain forms of feedstocks that are waste materials that can be, are already integrated into the cycle. Things like residues from sawmills. So when they make a table, there's a lot of sawdust around. If you take that up and turn it into a wood pellet, that's not having a huge effect on the environment, and it might be a more cycle, form of the use of the wood, a kind of cascading use of the wood. But the issue is really, I think it comes down to scale. And when you start burning these things at such a massive scale, as in the case of wood, there's only a certain amount of that sawdust that exists. But when you start to power entire states or entire countries, as is the case right now, off of burning wood, at that scale, there's no other way to meet that demand than through unsustainable industrial, logging practices. And I would say with renewable energy, we just need to make this transition towards these true forms of renewable energy that have been shown over and over again that they have the capacity to meet our demands, meet our requirements. We just need to make that transition. And I think things like energy efficiency and wind and solar, especially here in North Carolina with solar, and all these different forms of types of renewables, they have the potential to be there. We just have to commit and make that transition.
Yeah, and getting back to wood, I remember when this issue was being debated before the Senate Bill 3 passed, and one of the objections we had was that, well, it may be that you can burn wood scraps now when the economy is good and there's a lot of construction going on, and there's a lot of wood scraps. What happens when there's a recession and suddenly you have these large-scale operations going on to burn wood for electricity, and they've run out of feedstock, do they start cutting down trees? And everybody says, oh no, they wouldn't do that, But that's exactly what happened.
That's exactly what happens, right?
Yeah, and as you say, that it seems to be there's such potential out there in real renewable energy, that it doesn't really make sense from an environmental standpoint. There's also the argument, well, but trees are renewable. You can plant trees and they can grow back, so you can burn. It's a renewable resource in that sense. And in terms of climate change, they say, well, it's a carbon neutral process but it's really not a carbon neutral process at all, because you burn wood much faster than it grows back. And so that carbon isn't being sequestered at the same rate that we're producing carbon and releasing it into the atmosphere.
Right, and I think that an important point to understand about the carbon is that, yes, of course, we're acknowledging trees do regrow. We're not. It's a renewable resource in that trees grow back, but these energy policies are aimed at reducing carbon in time frames of like 2020, 2030. Those are the time frames in which the carbon reduction targets are set. We see that on a global basis. We see that on a local basis. But we all know that trees take a very long time to grow back. If anybody's ever planted a tree, they know.
Sit there and watch it grow. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Much more slow than watching paint dry. But so we're talking 60, 80 years, even in the South where trees grow very fast. And so, how can we base something as carbon neutral on this assumed assumption that they're even going to be replanted? And then say that we have an opportunity to wait 60, 80 years down the road for that carbon to be sequestered. I mean, if we know anything about climate change, we know we don't have 60 to 80 years to wait for this. We have to be reducing carbon now. And so it's a false pretense that using really back of the envelope science to say that all the trees we burn right now are carbon neutral because in 80 years a forest will grow back. That's not moving us forward. We actually have to acknowledge that we're moving backwards, because at day one, when those trees are burned, that carbon is going up into the atmosphere, and that's exactly what we're trying to avoid.
And of course, there's a factor of the practice of cutting forests down is usually done as a clear cut. You're removing a vast biodiversified tract of land and replacing it with a monoculture of one kind of tree or another, which doesn't have the same oxygen producing properties of a forest or carbon sequestration properties of a forest. So, tell me what the Dogwood Alliance is doing to address this issue.
Yeah, so we're really taking a kind of two-pronged approach to addressing this. Number one is working hard and focusing on changing the policies in Europe that are driving the expansion of the industry here. So like I mentioned at the beginning, they have these, a lot of it came out of an EU policy that said member states needed to increase their renewables by 20%, and a lot of that is being met through biomass, which is the reason that the industry is expanding here. So we're really aiming at changing that and making sure that the next renewable energy policies within Europe and the member states adequately limit biomass as a form of renewable energy by incorporating accurate carbon accounting, as we just talked about, incorporating adequate sustainability standards that protect from the conversion of our natural forest to pine plantations, and really addressing it on that policy front within Europe. And then on the second front, it's really building up the community movements and resistance here within the southern states to stop the expansion of these facilities in its tracks. So challenging the creation. Currently we have about 20 existing, give or take a few, biomass facilities, whether a manufacturing or a port facility, but there's over 30 proposed or under construction. We need to make sure we stop as much of that as possible.
Who's doing this? Individual industries on their own, or Duke Energy, or?
Yeah, it's mostly pellet manufacturing companies. Companies like Inviva, which is based up in Maryland in Bethesda. They're one of the largest producers here in the South. And then we're also actually even seeing European utility companies come over and create their own pellet manufacturing facilities here in the South. So in states like Louisiana and Mississippi, the United Kingdom's major utility, Drax, is coming over and actually building their own facilities in Louisiana, which, as we know, has precious wetland forests and ecosystems. They're building their facilities in Louisiana just all for export. So I mean, we're logging all of this wood. We're not even using it here. We're exporting it to Europe, which is just mind-boggling.
And so what are you doing? On what level are you working? Are you working with government agencies? Are you working on legislation? Are you just trying to address the industries themselves and approaching them directly? Mm-hmm. Tell me about what mode of activism you're in.
Right. So on a lot of it is actually addressing the policies and the legislation. As I mentioned, at the EU level, we operate within an amazing coalition internationally, and so it's working to change those policies and the legislation that they will create. And so our role in that is we really provide the on-the-ground evidence and story and build up the movement within the South that communicates strong opposition to those European policymakers so that they make the right policy decisions. So it's very in the policy world, right, especially on the international level. Mm-hmm. Actually, we just returned from 2 weeks in Europe.
And
myself and a coalition of organizations who work on our Forest Farm Fuel campaign. Our coalition returned from Europe. That includes the Southern Environmental Law Center here in North Carolina, and Natural Resources Defense Council, who are partner organizations on the campaign. Okay. And we returned from Europe, where we directly spoke truth to power and delivered the message from Southerners
to parliaments in Europe,
to the EU Parliament members, to the member states such as the United Kingdom, Belgium, which are major producers of these.
To representatives in the EU from those
yes,
countries.
Representatives in the EU from those countries who will have a hand in directly crafting and shaping the policies, which are happening in the next couple of years.
So do the EU members view burning biomass as part of their answer to the climate change issue? I mean, is that the rationale that's being used, that this is how they're reducing carbon emissions?
Yeah, that's the rationale. I mean, and it's I can say that was initially the rationale when these policies were created. I don't know if they had. I can't say for sure whether they thought that biomass would take off as much as it would, but it has, and that has created a lot of problems. What I can say is that, I just mentioned we returned from Europe, and this is we were there about a year ago, about 15 months ago. We were in Europe in 2014, came back in 2015. And even in that year's time, the first time we went over there, it was a whole debate of whether this was actually a problem, whether or not the industry was using whole trees or clear cutting forest, whether or not that this was a real issue. That was the debate. This time when we went over, it was widely understood that this was a problem and they needed to do something about it. So it's just showing that the power and the movement that's developing and continuing to grow here in the South is having a real effect on European policy, and they're understanding that this is an issue that we need to address. And I think that that's pretty neat and unique to this issue and campaign, is that community activism and community power building is having an effect on international policy. That's pretty. I mean, that happens. This is by no means the only example of that,
Sure.
but that's pretty unique, and that's happening right here with our Forest on Fuel campaign.
Is it a pretty public campaign in Europe right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's people are gaining a general understanding about it. I think a lot of people's eyes have been opened to the situation in the southern United States, specifically around forestry practices. There was a lot of disconnect there, and folks thought that, it's the United States, a highly developed country. They must protect their forests. They must have. Which is often not the case here in the South, and so people are beginning to learn more and more about the issue, and from our perspective, we've had a lot of success, but we have a long way to go, and we feel really grateful to have some wonderful partners on the campaign within Europe that have really helped us along.
So what percentage of the electricity that's produced in the European Union is biomass represented by, or what's the percentage that's projected? What's their goal in using biomass?
Yeah,
capacity?
That's a great question. I don't have the specific number off the top of my head. What I can say is that it's I think still fairly a small number. Because not all European countries are using biomass. It's focused specifically on the United Kingdom is by far and away the top user. They are importing the vast majority of our exports of wood pellets. Then you have countries like Denmark, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Italy, which are the top 5 users. And our exports in the U.S. doubled from about, or more than doubled from, I believe, about 1.3 million tons to about 3.6 million tons from 2012 to 2013, and we're over 4 million tons of wood pellets being shipped, being exported out of just the southern United States in 2014. That number is projected to quadruple in just the next couple of years. So this is, as I described it at the beginning, this is an emerging threat. This is something that if we don't fix the problem now, we could see just devastating effects on our last precious remaining natural standing forests. Increased logging, increased conversion to pine plantations. It's a very live issue that needs to be addressed right now. So while I think probably overall to answer, that number would be fairly small. It's growing very rapidly, but we have an opportunity now to stop it in its tracks, or adequately limit it so that it's not, devastating enough right now. and not let it get out of control and be another one of these issues that we're playing catch-up ball on, trying to stop before it gets way out of control.
Part of the problem, I know, is that what these countries and people in the United States who are advocating for it are saying, well, what we're trying to do is wean ourselves off of coal and fossil fuels.
Yeah.
And here we have this renewable resource at our disposal. And so we're fighting against that connotation of the word renewable.
Yeah. I think one thing, because sometimes we've heard this, and then folks will be like, well, we have to get off coal, we have to get off coal, and we agree with that. We definitely need to get off coal. But I think an important point to make is that a lot of these old coal plants that would destined to be shut down because of all of the hard work of so many
burning wood now instead.
Are actually either burning wood, which is not a solution, or they're doing what's called co-firing, which is actually extending the life of those coal plants. So they're able to actually keep those toxic coal plants online longer because they can reduce the amount of coal by, say, 20% or 30%, and replace that with wood.
Without adding emission controls
and then counting all of that as a carbon reduction because it's kind of carbon neutral. So, this is a big threat if you're talking about actually moving beyond coal, shutting down these coal plants. We don't want their lives extended through the destruction and burning of our forests.
Right.
Yeah.
So is there specific legislation that you're working for in North Carolina or in the Southeast that we need to know about?
Not at this moment. The wood pellet industry or the biomass industry hasn't really taken off here in the United States yet. We are working very much at the EPA level. So the EPA is currently developing and their stance on bioenergy, and under the Clean Power Plan, which folks might be aware of, Obama's Clean Power Plan. So they're developing their stance on bioenergy within that. That is due to come out sometime around this summer. And so we're really pushing them to not make the same mistake that Europe made.
And what kind of reception are you getting from the EPA?
Well, we've mixed signals as usual. We saw a lot of positive signs in the beginning. Actually, the EPA's they appointed a scientific advisory board to investigate the carbon issue around this, and that advisory board told them that you cannot account net zero emissions for woody biomass. That's a paraphrase, but essentially they said something along those lines. Even from residues, and you can't account for it at zero. So we saw that come out, and that's wonderful, and that's a huge step forward. Recently, we've seen some communications in the form of memos that are seeing that the EPA might punt on this specific issue. We're guessing for more political reasons rather than scientific, but no decision has been made yet. So we've seen a little bit of both sides, but definitely very hopeful that the EPA will make the right decision, which I believe will really guide here what happens in the next several years within the southern states and North Carolina.
You've been focusing on the forest in terms of biofuel, but I mean, a lot of research that I've done has shown that there are real problems with almost every kind of biomass that has been put forward as a partial solution to climate change and air pollution. Can you think, or are you aware of any type of biomass that is an exception to that is that would be a good part of the solution?
I think that I would say that I think that there are certain types of feedstocks out there that are, a little bit more in the category of true waste. Like I mentioned with the sawdust, and there are certain other things. I hesitate to say exactly what, because I myself am not fully informed, and I know that there can be issues. What I'll say is that I'll bring it back to the scale. Is that when we start relying on a large portion of energy coming from biomass, no matter what the feedstock, or same with biofuels. We saw this debate in biofuels. When you start relying on a large portion of that coming from any type of feedstock, whether it's agricultural or industrial or forestry or whatever, that you're going to have issues with it.
That's what it seems like to me. The one exception I can think of is and it's all in experimental stage now, is the algae experiments that are going on, which seem to produce a large amount of oil or substances which can be used to substitute for petroleum products, basically. But again, we don't know what the large-scale ramifications of that process will be. But that does seem like something promising, but it's still something somewhere in the future.
And I think that brings up an important point I'd like to make, is that biomass is this big, broad term, that we really have to fully understand before you say, oh, biomass is the solution, because it can mean things like algae, which I agree with you does look very promising in this stage, But as it currently stands, what we're seeing is that any large scale basically means wood, and basically, or other
crops like corn or something like that,
or crops like
which
corn,
are completely environmentally damaging.
Right?
And the energy equation is very close with ethanol, and it's questionable whether you get any more energy out of it than you put into it.
So it's this is a developing, really emerging issue that I think we have opportunity right now to, make some wise decisions and really ensure, because it's, like I said, it's not something that has expanded to a large degree. In fact, the only utility that we're really seeing use conversions to biomass is Dominion Power in Virginia. And Dominion has really went the wrong direction in terms of converting, using a lot of wood in terms of their utility generation. And
but people in Virginia who are fighting it?
Yes, definitely. Virginians are pushing back against it, and using that to pressure the EPA to make the right decision. But we haven't seen that, so we have an opportunity, especially here in North Carolina now, to really get this right in terms of biomass and make sure that the type of feedstocks that we're using are not damaging to the environment or our communities and the local communities that are suffering because of what's currently happening in Europe.
So, what can people do?
Well, there's lots of ways that people can get involved. First off, I would say that a big part of this issue right now is just around the sharing of information and knowledge, because as we mentioned, biomass is this kind of convoluted term that not a lot of people know about. We all know coal's bad. That message is out there, thankfully. But biomass, we really need a lot of sharing of information, and so I would recommend that people. Dogwood Alliance has done some really incredible short documentary videos on this. If you go to our website and check out our campaign page, you can easily find all of our videos, and just share those and to spread the word about what's happening to our southern forests.
What's your webpage?
It's www.dogwoodalliance.org. And
how else can people get in touch with you? What's the phone number of the office and your email address, if you want to give that out? Maybe.
Yeah, no, that's all right. I mean, we have contact forms for all of our contacts on the website, so you can find it there. Our number here at the office is 828-251-2525, and so they can feel free to call the office. That's all on the website, and feel free to contact. I also would say too that one of the things in which people can get involved, I think one of the issues here and why this is happening is because, and you mentioned it a little earlier, in that we have continued to undervalue the services that our natural world and environment provide to us, and we undervalue those, especially with forests. So, forests provide us with clean drinking water. They provide us with flood protection and create habitat for all of our native and endemic species. They carbon sequestration. And we recently launched a campaign here at Dogwood called What's It Worth? And this is encouraging people. If you go to the Dogwood Alliance page, you can link to, it's kind of the opening banner, and you can link to the What's It Worth thing. And we're encouraging people to actually submit personal stories and videos and talking about what forests mean to them, what benefits they get from our standing native forests here in the Southeast. And I think continuing to develop that conversation, and that our forests aren't fuel, our forests aren't meant to be cut down, that we gain a lot of benefits from protecting and preserving the forests that we do have, and valuing that. I think that's going to move us over the long term in the right direction. So I would encourage everybody listening and watching to submit one of those videos and begin to change that conversation about how we view and value our standing forests.
And can people join the Dogwood Alliance? Is there a place on the webpage where they can make a donation and
definitely
get on your mailing list?
Yeah, we'd love that. I mean, I've always encouraged that, if a lot of people don't have time or are busy to get involved or take action in a giving time sort of way, but giving a donation to Dogwood Alliance and any group that they care about is a form of taking action. That is a form of getting involved, and that's a form of working on an issue that you care about. And so we definitely have a donation page on the Dogwood website. Would very much appreciate, thank you, to become a member, to give what you're able, and it makes a huge difference for our organizations, and I know other organizations all across North Carolina.
That's great. Is there anything else you would like to say?
No, I would just say thank you, Avram, for having us and coming here today.
My pleasure.
And our forests aren't fuel. That's our message.
Thanks, Ed.
All right, thanks a lot.
All right.
Yeah.